Retro Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Tankard Lexicon, and in this edition of the Steampunk Beginner's Guide, we'll continue our discussion on technology in fiction. But before we get started, we need to elaborate on something we discussed in our previous episode. That steampunk is a high concept genre. High concept stories are those which focus on a single premise, unlike low concept stories that are more concerned with character development. High concept stories are very common in science fiction because they seek to answer singular what-if questions. What is it like to live in a robot-controlled simulation? Or what if cities can move on wheels? Mortal Engines, on which we end our last episode, is an example of high-concept storytelling, and in this episode we'll be exploring how such concepts are used in fiction, or more specifically, how technology can be used in world building. In Mortal Engines, it's the prevalence of severe earthquakes that forced the world's population to create mobile cities, a lifestyle of its own problems. In order to sustain themselves, these cities are forced to feed off each other. Larger cities catch and digest smaller cities, and if a larger city happens to break down, smaller cities are sure to pick the husk clean. In one of my big favorite series, Lost Exile, the various nations on the world of Presta depend upon airships for transport because of the mountainous ranges. However, these require fuel called Claudia, something easy enough to synthesize, but for Claudia to work they need purified water, and that is something hard to come by on the planet, forcing the people to pay high prices for a simple glass of water. Mortal Engines, on which we end our last episode, is an example of high-concept storytelling, and in this episode we'll be exploring how such concepts are used in fiction, or more specifically, how technology can be used in world building. Now, including interesting technologies is all well and good, but some writers tend to be really enthusiastic about their own inventions. Some really like certain machines or really want to include that specific scene into their fiction, such as sword fights, which in a science fiction setting make little practical sense. But sometimes these add to the themes in a narrative. That is where the personal shields in Frank Herbert's Dune come from. They protect the wearer from firearms, but not from melee weapons like daggers. Odd, yes, but thematically suitable for a story about political and literal backstabbing. But certain writers and directors just really want to do that extra special something in their stories that just make no sense. Nonsensical use of technology is often justified with the line,
"What do you know? Haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief?"
However, the suspension of disbelief is the willingness of the audience to accept certain events or characteristics as probable in a work of fiction presented to them, even though they know it is impossible in real life. We accept that My Little Ponies can talk and 100-ton metal monstrosities can traverse any landscape with ease, and space wizards are a thing. But there is a point where the audience can no longer suspend their disbelief. World War II bombers dropping bombs in space and pensioners surviving nuclear explosions by hiding in refrigerators were considered so stupid they became memes into themselves. Sometimes these things don't even make sense in their own context. It makes the audience go, huh? And if that happens, the immersion has been broken. And no, if you need headcanon to explain the events in a movie, it means the narrative has failed. And retcons don't count either! So how to prevent creating such immersion-breaking scenes? Both items and space can convey a message or set a certain mood. This could range from the creator's identity, a certain social message, or a fictional narrative. We all know the laboratory of an evil genius trope. A dungeon with large machines emitting ominous lights and electric currents. Maybe a table or a chair in the middle of the room with restraints on them. This image alone tells you everything you need to know about the character who lives here. We are conditioned to make connections between objects and abstract concepts. When I say revolver, you might think cowboy. When I say sword, you might think something like a knight. It's why stereotypes work, but can also work against us. In a work of fiction, a worn or wielded object tells us something about the identity of its owner, the creative, the outcast, one that doesn't want to be restrained by society's norms or has little interest in mainstream culture. But besides a visual representation of a character's personality, such as devices, they can also have a thematic purpose in a larger narrative. A ship, for example, can just be that, a vehicle that helps the cast get from one area to another, but it can also be the home to a cast of characters, something of emotional value, something that binds people together as a family, by choice or otherwise. Maybe that is the appeal of airships in steampunk. Unlike sea-bound vessels, you can go anywhere with them with your surrogate family. However, ships can also be death traps, a place where you are locked in with a monster, or maybe people you cannot trust. The ship is a self-contained world with nowhere to go, and all you can do is fight, hide, or jump ship in order to survive. Another common theme with technology is human ambition, and how our desire to improve ourselves to make the seemingly impossible probable can consume or destroy us. It can be a quest to create utopia or to fulfill one's own selfish desire. The machine becomes synonymous with its creator's ambition for either good or evil. Finally, there is the world itself. Science is a collaborative effort. Every form of technology is built on something that precedes it. In steampunk stories, we often see visionaries who create devices far ahead of their time. In a difference engine, these people changed the world as the machine became part of society. However, Frankenstein was rejected because he created new life out of corpses. Yet, other inventors hid their inventions from the world because they could be used for evil. Or they entrust these devices to some plucky teenager for them to do the right thing.
I wonder why nobody will entrust such a thing to me.
Are there any consequences to a unique machine existing in this world? In Steam Boy, the protagonist tries to keep the revolutionary steam ball out of the hands of several parties who seek to use the technology for their own gain or ideological purposes. In The Hunt for Red October, Sean Connery's character tries to use secret submarine stealth engines as leverage to gain asylum to the United States, as these would change the nature of submarine warfare. And in Star Wars, The Last Jedi have bombers in space because Rian Johnson really wanted World War II bombers in his movie.
Yes, The Last Jedi is a great example on how to break a setting. Nothing we'll see in future Star Wars films might make sense again.
But that's the problem with long-running franchises. The transporters of Star Trek are notorious for this. But I don't want to bore you with examples because the video is running long enough as it is. And quite frankly, there are plenty of compilation videos making fun of Star Trek's inconsistencies. The point is, the transporter seems to be nothing more but a plot convenience generator at this point, a tool that is capable to do whatever the script requires.
So, who do you blame for this? The writers, the director. Sometimes this problem can be found all the way up to the studio executives themselves. Movie making is a collaborative effort. Many things can go wrong.
Therefore, it is wise to set a number of boundaries of what machines can do, under what conditions. It can be something like long recharge times, or the costs and expenses. And other familiar tropes is that certain technology requires rare resources, often given fancy names like unobtainium or contrivium. In Black Panther, it's vibranium. In the anime Escaflowne, they use dragon hearts. Often this is a resource that is a way to explain why a world world contains unlikely technology that is in short supply, it motivates conflicts between the various factions and, well, little else. This is not necessarily a bad writing trope, but it can feel a bit lazy. Regardless, it is a good way to explain why one faction is more powerful than the others, because they hoarded most of this particular resource. I already used the example of Claudia in the science fiction anime Last Exile that helps airships levitate. However, for it to work it needs clean water, something that is already in short supply, and therefore the common folk have a direct interest in how this resource is being used. The point here is that Claudia is just an interesting way to power technology, but it also shapes the world itself. Tiberium in the Command & Conquer universe is a very valuable resource that also happens to be consuming the world. In James Cameron's Avatar, unobtainium on the other hand just happens to be there, and they need it for reasons.
It's just a metaphor for oil, okay?
Yes, another trope of science fiction is using technology and resources as metaphors to moralize about the current state of our society. Now, there's nothing wrong with this per se. A matter of fact, some of the best fiction contain social messages, but these are interwoven into engaging plots and often leave the meaning open to interpretation. But when you use fictional resources such as Contrivium as nothing more as a MacGuffin, it becomes obvious that the writer had other priorities than writing a good story.
And that brings us to the steampunks themselves.
Most just look at it as a creative endeavor, or just want to challenge themselves. Others want to tell a story, be it about themselves, by alternating their everyday appliances, or by making up elaborate adventures for the fictional characters they portray. But there are plenty who really want to recreate archaic technology for the presentation, or to find new applications for old technology in the modern day. There's no one motivation why steampunks do this. Motivations range from preservation to environmentalism, or pure artistic expression and alternative ways of education.
Or in our case, to inspire, and that is what we'll continue to do for the foreseeable future. Now, thank you all for watching this episode of the Steampunk Beginner's Guide. Next time, we'll elaborate more on world building. And of course, as always, make it your way.